10. Love Among the Ruins. The chair was harsh against Ace's back, and there was a disturbing lightness on her chest. Horrible things danced in the darkness on the insides of her eyelids. Gabriel and Tanith had shaken her up more than she had believed. Still, sleeplessness was security. Anything could get at her while she was asleep. She didn't believe that anything was going to try. Everything would happen, Gabriel and Tanith had promised, in the morning. Christ alone knew why. They had taken refuge in Sandra's bedroom. Ace had assumed leadership of the group, insisting they go somewhere safe and stay there together. Safety in numbers, right? After they'd settled in, Ace had realised they'd missed someone out. Cranley was loose in the house, easy prey for Gabriel and Tanith, and Sandra had mentioned someone called Wedderburn. Despite protests, Ace refused to let anyone go and find them, and the guilt was beginning to gnaw at her. Ace was sitting on a chair, propped up firmly against the door. She was grimly determined to stay awake. Benny was still messed up after her experiences in the cellar, and Sandra was a wimp anyway. No one else was going to look out for them, not the doctor. She stared across the room at Sandra, tucked safely in bed, sound asleep. She had cried her way into oblivion. For the past couple of hours, she'd entertained Ace with a decent impersonation of a human-shaped rock. Bernice was restless. She had slumped quietly on the floor, slipping into a light and troubled sleep, constantly turning and twisting, kicking her blanket away from her. Ace was tempted to cover her up, but found that she couldn't budge from the chair. Benny was probably freezing, but Ace was loath to move. Jealousy, perhaps. Benny looked so much better than she ever had. Better body, figure, build, life. Who needs it, eh? Her eyes left Benny and latched onto the bullet hole clumsily punched into the ceiling. How the hell had that got there, she wondered. Whoever did it was using some bloody heavy artillery. Ace wished she'd had a gun. Sod the doctor and his stupid guns are for the limp-brained moralizing. She needed the reassuring squareness pressed against her chest right now. There was something about Gabriel and Tanith that shitted her up. Something worse than evil, worse than death. She didn't know what it was, but she'd have felt better if she had the means to shoot it. The next minute, Benny was shaking her awake. She woke, swearing. "Good morning," Benny sounded cheerful but hollow. "It's wonderful to find you so keen and ready for action." Shit, Ace spat, wondering what had died in her mouth. Her eyes leapt from Benny's lively but pale features to Sandra, who was hovering behind Benny's shoulder. Everyone seemed okay. "Gabriel and Tanith have been," Sandra said coldly, "and things weren't okay anymore." Ace glanced round and saw that she was still jammed tightly against the door. No one could have got in, unless they could walk through walls, which was a possibility she hadn't discounted. She had to force herself not to howl with laughter. No, this was hysteria. This was not good. "When? How? What?" she snapped, focusing herself on the matter in hand. "They pushed this under the door," Benny was bland. 10 minutes ago." She held a piece of card between finger and thumb. Ace stared at it. "Gabriel and Tanith cordially invite you to a breakfast in your own home to celebrate the end of the world as we know it and the birth pains of a new reality." "It's rather stylish," Benny chimed in suddenly. "Warped but logical." Ace stared at her in uncomprehending malice, and she broke off. "It was only a thought. I'm not going." Bernice stared awkwardly at her feet, both planted firmly on the dining room lino. Foremost in her mind was a sense of confusion. She looked away from her feet and stared coldly at Ace and Sandra, who shared the same bewildered facial expression. Benny was in doubt that her face was set similarly. Sandra had left first, shuffling wordlessly out of the room. Ace immediately sprang after her, not to get her back in, as Benny had supposed, but to follow her downstairs. Then Benny felt herself shamble after them. There was no coercion. She knew exactly what she was doing and exactly why she needed to do it. Now she had stopped. Those motives seemed obscure. Maybe it was mental control. Maybe it was a need. Maybe they had to see Gabriel and Tanith. Maybe the Doctor was going to land the TARDIS somewhere peaceful. Pigs would sprout wings and defy the laws of aerodynamics. Maybe she'd just got a touch tipsy and would wake soon in her room in the TARDIS. But everything that had happened since Gabriel and Tanith seemed dreamlike. It felt so unreal that it had to be true. She let her eyes pan down the length of the room, contemplating the present contents of the non-real paradigm that Sandra called her dining room. The table, a hefty oak affair, was already laid neatly. Lace cloth buried beneath cruet, a jungle of flowers, cutlery tray, toast rack and butter dish. And plates. 5 plates, bearing piles of something greasy but appetizing. Benny decided that cholesterol poisoning was preferable to starvation. This particular strain of food didn't seem familiar, but since the Doctor had a peculiar inability to master the culinary arts, she'd probably tasted something similar incognito aboard the TARDIS. Benny wanted to swoop down and consume everything on the table, up to and including the begonias, but she held back. She glanced at Ace again, seeing equal uncertainty in her companion. Ace wasn't looking at the table, but over it, her gaze fixed on their hosts. Gabriel and Tanith stood with their backs to the window and the morning sun. Benny remembered little of last night, and she hadn't known what to expect from this pair. Ace had told her that they were attractive with a loathsome edge, but Benny wasn't so certain. It was true, they were physical marvels. They were beautiful as angels, gods walking among their mortal followers. They were attractive and desirable, and Gabriel was hunky enough to give her a hot and sticky thrill whenever she really thought about him. But, and this was a positively humongous but, they were repulsive. There was not one aspect of their oh-so-beautiful appearance that didn't make Benny want to retch with disgust. They were stunning corpses with rotting souls. When they smiled, Benny felt her stomach trying to eat through her intestines. They weren't dressed as she remembered. Gabriel had changed into a dark green velvet suit, with a thick collar and neck clasp. A patterned smoking jacket tightened around his stomach like a miniature corset, and a ruffled shirt made the space up to his neck. There was an elaborate ring on his finger, inset with a jewel the colour of blood. Tanith wore a heavy white felt suit, a check-patterned necktie clutching at her throat. A formless white cap balanced on the top of her head, forever on the verge of collapsing. Their appearance carried with it a brooding elegance, which seemed to enhance their wretchedness. "You had to come in the end," Gabriel smiled lopsidedly, watching them through half-closed eyes. "Welcome, little ladies, little dolls." "Sit!" Tanith declaimed, throwing her arms wide open in a too expansive gesture of welcome. "Eat, drink, and be merry." "For tomorrow we die," Ace growled by Benny's ear. "Oh, we have no intention of keeping you waiting." Gabriel's voice was honey. "Now, your places are allotted, your breakfast's full and English." Sandra moved jerkily to the nearest chair and lowered herself onto it slowly. Benny noticed that she was shaking, manipulating her cutlery crudely, fumbling as if they were unfamiliar utensils. Benny was next. She found her plate accompanied by a label bearing her name in a Gothic hand, alongside a scratchy caricature of her features. This was exaggerated and spiteful, and it left her feeling wounded in a small way. She kept silent, took her place, and began to eat tentatively, prodding at the food, trying to work out what it was and whether or not it was still alive, before slashing at it with her knife. It tasted okay. Whatever else they might be, Gabriel and Tanith were good cooks. Ace hovered defiantly in the doorway, watching with deep suspicion as the domestic scene unfolded before her. Only Benny seemed to notice her stance. Faced with a choice of giving in to pressure or being both ignored and hungry, Ace chose the former. She sat warily between Sandra and Benny, glaring across the table and occasionally deigning to eat something. There was a glass by Benny's plate, filled almost to the brim with milk. You don't have anything with a bit more body, I suppose? A couple of things, Tanith replied. A faint smile crossed her face. Silence ensued, punctuated by the sound of cutlery cracking, forejaws grinding, tension expanding across the table, minutes aching past. "We are," Gabriel broke the silence, "in residence in the now disused room of the late Jennifer Winterdawn. I hope no one has any objections." Silence. "Dad wouldn't like that," Sandra said softly. "Your father has no objection," Tanith giggled. "He is beyond such mortal concerns." Benny's body contracted, a protection against the sudden cold. "What have you done with them?" Ace said, with a clarity and a politeness that she only used when she was being really hostile. "They are gone, locked forever in limbo." It was simple, implanting suggestions in their minds, playing on their curiosity. "They had been written out of the Book of Life," Tanith embellished the theme. "They were cluttering up the plot." "You see," Gabriel added, "you three are superb, lovely human beings. The Doctor and the Professor are less so. We really wouldn't get on with them, so we shunted them out of reality. My brother says that there are a couple of devious and untrustworthy types who, given time, could work out what makes us tick, and then how to stop the pendulum. You three, on the other hand, are wonderful individuals, but completely incapable of working together without the guidance of your patriarchs. A sad fact, but true. The Doctor is a loner at heart. He believes that he can use friendship to build a shell against the cold and heartless world he is forced to confront. He doesn't need you, but you need him." "He'll get back," Ace said, her hostility undiminished. "Be sure." "He will not," Gabriel snapped. It seemed to be the end of the matter. "So, what do you want with us?" Benny chimed in. "Anything you can do," Tanith replied. "We want it." "And what are you doing?" Benny pressed her point home. "Taking on the universe," Gabriel replied. "We've already destroyed it, you understand. Things can never be the same again. There is a monumental battle between creator and creation, which must inevitably lead to the destruction of one or the other. We're going to have fun finding out." The pause was shattered by a low melodic song emanating from Tanith's lips. Benny didn't believe that something so disgusting could be responsible for something so beautiful. "Spread a little happiness as you go by." Gabriel was on his feet, his arm and motion blurring across the tabletop. There was a contact, a crunch of flesh against flesh. Benny whirled round to see Ace's head lolling backwards, blood rippling from the corner of her mouth. For a horrible moment, Benny was afraid that Gabriel had broken her neck. Then she straightened up, wiping the blood away. A smear remained. Both Gabriel and Tanith were standing now. Tanith was passive, hands tucked into her jacket pockets, a mischievous smile on her lips. Gabriel was a brooding, aggressive hulk, licking spots of Ace's blood from his fist. "Happiness?" Ace snarled. "Yeah." She delivered an ocean of saliva into Gabriel's face. Benny felt a desperate thing trying to claw its way out of her stomach. She'd never believed there was really such a thing as evil. She'd never believed that such an absolute concept could have a tangible existence. But here it was now, standing in front of her. Absolute physical evil with a big E. She said so. "Evil?" Tanith's voice was a cool hush, a missile-launching sequence hush. She didn't raise her voice, and that made Benny feel worse. "You dare compare us to that trivial nonentity? Evil is a fashion victim. We go beyond evil and its pallid opponent. We are lovely, loathsome, wonderful, worthless, superlative and shit, the world made flesh. The universe in a microcosm, the cosmos incarnate, the totality of all things incognito, and more and less. We are mad love in an existential universe. We are nihilist messiahs, not born, aborted into the universe. We have the light. We have the knowledge. We have the power and the glory forever and ever. Amen. We are freaked out. We are totally off our trolley. We are one coconut short of a fairground stall. In short, we are deranged. We are psychopaths, sociopaths up the garden path. We are mad, and you are trapped with us. Delicious smiles played across their faces, insane, ripe smiles. But Gabriel clapped his hands together, his voice gaining a strident, plummy quality. You don't want to hear about our problems. To one side of Benny, Sandra began to retch frantically. Which one do you like? Gabriel asked his companion. Oh, Dorothy. Tanith gazed lazily at Ace, who squirmed aggressively. The way she moves is thrilling. Then Sandra, a bedtime confection. You don't rank Bernice? My favourite, the fake, the completely unqualified archaeologist who got away with it because she was good. What a wonderful world she must have lived in, not knowing how much was real and how much wasn't. A beautiful twilight world. You're talking about perception, my brother. I'm talking about sex. The same thing, surely. Shut up! Benny screamed, surprising herself with her force and her venom. I don't want to listen to any of this. A silence descended on the room. The noiselessness of a funeral. Come here, Benny, Gabriel said. Not a request. No, Benny insisted. I said, come here. Suddenly, there was a rod of agony driving through bone and muscle and tissue and sinew and nerves, piercing her spine. She felt herself go rigid, her body stiffening soundlessly. Her eyes bulged as electrical pain surged through her nerve system. There were needles through her hands and wrists and shoulders and head and knees and feet and thighs. Invisible wires tore into her body, now loose, now taut. Her wires wrenched. She leapt up to her feet in a single jerky movement. The puppet masters tugged again, and she was pulled across the room until she was face to face with Gabriel. Ace was shouting at the back of her head. Benny tried to concentrate on what she was saying, but found it impossible. The limits of the world had shrunk to include herself, her pain, Gabriel, and the space between them. Gabriel leant forward, his fingers locking round her neck. The pressure on her body loosened. She was free, but there were other pressures now, Gabriel's thumbs nuzzling under her chin. She looked into his eyes and saw nothing. No pupils, no retina, no whites, no colour. In that single, quiet moment, Benny knew that she was going to die. Hello, Benny Summerfield, Gabriel said. Remember me? I remember you. Talking was an effort. I saw you in the cellar. You saw the whole of me. These bodies are fragments of what we are. You showed me things. We showed you all things. We can see all things. We draw our sight and power from the structure of the universe itself. All space. Omnicognition. Do you know, Benny, how easy it is to kill someone? Yes. She didn't speak, but Gabriel seemed able to hear her thoughts. Oh, it is much easier than that. Much easier, Gabriel continued. Life is fragile and death is final. All I have to do now is grind my thumbs, perhaps for a minute. Then you can let go. You're not scaring her. You're not scaring anyone. Ace was yelling out of Benny's vision. Briefly, Benny found herself feeling friendlier, closer to Gabriel than her travelling companion. Yes, he is. Benny was shocked to feel tears brushing her skin. You think of hurting her, and I'll kill you! Bastard! Ace howled. Ace? Benny's voice was loud and wavering. If you don't shut up now, then I will come back and haunt you. Gabriel was nodding. You understand. He seemed soothing and reassuring, the finality. When I press, I will destroy a life. It is that simple. There are millions who don't know you and don't care about you. There is pressure, and something lively and pleasant and valuable you will leave the world for good. As I press, you will understand what it is to die, what a terrible thing I am doing, the absolute certainty that the end of your life is here and now. Life is life, and death is death. These are facts. They cannot be abrogated. Goodbye. Gabriel began to squeeze. It was a gentle sensation, but Benny was panicking. Inside she was screaming in terror and anguish, filled with a dreadful fear of the unknown and an eternal nothing. Bedtime, existential terror she'd felt before, never this close. "Oh God, I don't want to die!" "Stop it!" Ace shrieked. But the voice was distant. Benny's eyes were closing. The world was dark and airless. Ace's voice was her last link with life. She needed to cling to it, that voice which had sounded so disgusting less than 2 minutes ago. She loved it now. She loved Ace. She loved life. Ace was howling. Everything was going. Then there was no pressure. The hands were still there, clenched around her throat, but no longer pressing. Benny breathed vigorously, not daring to make another move, too scared even to open her eyes. "We understand," Tanith's voice. "We understand what it is to kill, exactly what is lost at the moment of death. We understand how valuable each and every life is. We just don't care." Suddenly, Benny's dark world was whirling and tumbling. A giddy sensation clutched her. She was falling through the darkness. She clutched herself protectively, bruising her back and shoulders as they smashed against something solid. The pain was dull and natural. There was nothing at her neck. Her eyes fell open, and she saw that she was on the floor, half crouched, half lying where Gabriel had shoved her. He stood over her, smiling graciously. Benny flinched, certain he was going to kick her. "And what about the people in the cellar?" Ace said accusingly. "Did you make them understand?" "Ah, you've put 2 and 2 together," Tanith replied. "It wasn't a massive leap to that conclusion, I trust." "We killed them." "Don't worry, they suffered. Each killing took hours, packed with intense torture." "They saw the other bodies. They understood that they were going to die. They had no illusions about that." "Why?" Ace was saying, not shouting, whispering terribly. "Those killings had a purpose, though one I doubt you would appreciate." "We are not, as you may have noticed," Tanith took over, "human. We are incorporeal creatures, beings of pure energy, drawing our strength from the cosmic structure itself. We could do anything in that form, but we prefer to address the human race in its own shape. We lured people to the house, killed them, and removed parts from their genetic structures, and we sculpted them into containers for our essences. To all intents and purposes now, we are fully human. We have human bodies and human organs and human responses to external stimuli." Benny stared up at them, disgusted. "You said you could do anything. Why was it so bloody necessary to kill those people? Couldn't you have grown those bodies on your own?" Tanith nodded. "It was more fun this way." "You're sick," Ace was yelling. "Delightfully so. Elegantly so." There was a crash and a thump above Benny's head. With another crash, Ace leapt onto the floor by Benny's side, her body hunched and arching forward. There was an intense animalistic feel to her movements, a predator ready to strike. In one hand she held a knife, the same knife Cranley had once pressed to Benny's face. Ace must have found it in Sandra's room. It was motionless in Ace's rigid hand. "Time for the surgical cure, sickos," Ace spat. "Oh, put it away. You don't know where it's been," Tanith snapped. "It's been in Benny's socks, not pretty." Ace said nothing. She held the knife still. "Melodrama," Gabriel said. He reached forward, locked his fingers round the blade, and pulled it from Ace's grip. He screamed and dropped the knife. His hand was curling into a fist. Benny saw the blood seeping between the cracks in the fingers onto his wrist. Impossibly white skin, stained dark pink. The pain was etched onto his face, so tangible and real he couldn't be faking. It had hurt him. Benny looked across to Tanith and saw the woman shaking her head, smiling too. She reached the knife before Ace had a chance to dart for it. Eventually Gabriel's scream dulled into heavy breathing. He released his injured hand and raised his head so that all in the room could see his haggard, satisfied expression. He opened his fist into a flat palm, displaying a deep red gash, still open and dribbling blood. "Something with more body, Benny," he said shakily. Benny tried to resist. God knows she tried. But the minds of Gabriel and Tanith were too powerful for her. She sprang forward, raising her head to nuzzle against the outstretched palm. Sick with herself, she began to bite at the wound, letting the blood flow into her mouth. Blood guttered into her mouth. She began to lick generously, spooning more and more between her lips. The blood was tasteless, but it was the sensation that drove her on. It was electric, like a first kiss, like the first time she'd had sex. "No!" She pulled her mouth from his hand, spitting bloody saliva flecks. Scowling, Benny let her body sink into a protective fetal shape. She felt dirty and degraded and violated and deprived and sickened. "We are leaving now," Tanith said. "You can do what you like." Benny didn't see them leave. Ace was crouching beside her, an arm hugging round her waist. Benny felt warm, as if it was her mother holding her. It was a good feeling. "Those two are on a power kick." Ace's voice was gentle as her body. "Everything they do is aimed at degrading us. If they force us to do these things, if they force us to enjoy them, then that's their problem, not ours. We're going to take everything they throw at us and throw it back at them. And we're going to win. They're never, ever going to get away with this." "Ace," Benny said, clutching at the collar of Ace's combat suit. "They're going to kill me. I'm not going to leave this house, not under my own steam. When I'm dead, I want you to remember, I loved travelling in the TARDIS. If you see the Doctor again, tell him that I loved him. He was a git, but I loved him. And I loved you. Remember." "You're not going to die?" "I am," Benny replied, as if it was a certainty. And it was. "No," Ace insisted. "I'm going to do something, anything. You with me?" Benny stared at her shaking hands. They didn't seem like parts of her body. They were distant things, parts of a distant creature. "What are you going to do?" "I don't—" Ace began. "I'll tell what we're going to do." Benny stared mutely at Sandra. Her clothes, the clothes she'd put on not half an hour earlier, were scuffed and dirty and stained grey with vomit. Sandra herself was in no better condition, but there was a new hardness in her eyes. "I'll tell you. We'll go down to the cellar, get the pyramid going, and get Dad back, and your friend." "We can't," Ace was scornful. "Only Truman knows how to use the bloody thing, and he's dead." "No, he's not," Sandra replied, her hardness becoming something cheerfully manic. More Wedderburn held the broken orchid stem between finger and thumb, sighing as he inspected its wounds. The flower was weak. Wedderburn saw how close to death it was, and felt something cold brush his soul. He placed a finger in his mouth and tore repeatedly at the skin with his canine tooth until he drew blood. Gently, he rubbed the blood into the broken stem. The plant writhed rhythmically. Wedderburn felt warmer as he imagined it singing. The chattering of the other orchids drew his attention. They had scented the blood and were hunting its source. Wedderburn pulled his finger away hastily. "Did she scare you?" he whispered to his plants, "blundering in here like some mad elephant? Were you frightened?" The plants danced to a wave pattern. "Blood for you tonight," Wedderburn whispered, thrilling himself with the extent of his morbid fantasy. "A whole carcass. No, 2, I promise." The orchids swam, tied to the flower beds. They indulged his imagination, and Wedderburn was grateful. The real world intruded suddenly, a sharp knock on the door. Wedderburn shook his head wearily. There were 2 at the door, neither known to him, rather glossy and unattractive, like characters from some unspeakable American soap opera. He glanced anxiously between the 2. Good morning, Mr. Wedderburn, the young man said with restraint and politeness. Jeremy said we would find you here. Forgive our appalling lack of manners, the woman said, edging in before Wedderburn could speak. We both studied under Professor Winterdawn. He invited us to an evening here, but until now we've been forced to decline. My sister and I were impressed by your book. A page-turner. I couldn't put it down. Wedderburn laughed at this, and the young couple joined in. May we come in? I'm afraid that might be awkward at the moment. No, we understand. A scientist and his work should not be separated. Goodbye, Mr. Wedderburn, the woman smiled, and suddenly she and her colleague were gone. Wedderburn closed the door after them, feeling slightly nonplussed. The list of people stalking the corridors of the house without his knowledge was becoming voluminous. The doctor and his friends. The woman with the gun. He found he couldn't quite visualize her properly. Her image blurred in his head. Had she ever been there at all? And now this pair, whatever their names were. He shambled back to his work table, to his books, to his seeds, to his meticulously cleaned tools, to the neat brown packages of raw meat. Cranley glanced from woman to woman with dull eyes. His sanity was focusing sharply, but the tiny packages of clarity were coming less frequently and disappeared with greater speed. The final descent was coming soon. The line of madness that once crossed could not be passed again. He half welcomed the prospect of permanent insanity. Sandra he regarded coldly and without affection. The understanding he had gained when Truman's mind had burst in upon his own was uncomfortable. The woman before him had openly scorned him. So many things she had said about him, so many of them true. Truman's mind was an uncomfortable growth, a tumour on his mind, screaming at him from the inside of his skull. He had his enemy's experience and knowledge. Sandra knew this. He knew that he could operate the tetrahedron for them. But he didn't see why he should have to. Sandra was clutching the side of the sarcophagus, steadying herself against oncoming blindness. The woman called Ace stood beside her, silently clutching the tetrahedron to her chest, her fingertips running along its sharp edges. Then there was Bernice, sitting in the corner, casting suspiciously round the room, a shadow of the fierce spirit he had met before. "Will you do it?" Sandra was asking. She had asked this several times already, and was beginning to sound like a jammed record. "Why?" His voice had the texture of sandpaper. "Dad and the doctor are trapped. They can't get out unless you help." That was a good argument, the best, in fact. But Cranley's nature rebelled. It knew the consequences of such an action, and it held him back. "No," he said softly. "Will you do it for me?" Sandra's dying eyes were imploring. "No," Cranley insisted. I will never do anything for you again." The woman in the corner, Bernice, remember her name, Bernice, was rising to her feet, eyes fixed on him. Existential terror seized Cranley by the lungs. He felt dwarfed in comparison to the vision before him. "Would you do it for me?" asked Laura. Cranley gazed at her for a moment, his lips parted. "Give it here," he said to Ace. He took the pyramid from her unresisting hands. Gabriel and Tanith lay together on the double bed in the room once occupied by Jeremy and Jennifer Winterdawn. They had chosen this place specifically. This room had been preserved by Winterdawn. This room had been transformed through grief into a shrine. It was a place of sanctity. Gabriel and Tanith enjoyed the sensation of violating this place, breaking the taboos, tearing down the Holy of Holies. They had been lying on the bed for so long that their bodies had left an imprint on the sheets. Their bodies were locked into an embrace, but not a passionate one. They had been lying still and silent. Gabriel put an end to it, whispering into his sister's ear. "Do you see what they're doing?" "I see," Tanith replied. "Pointless. They won't get anything." "They won't, but it worries me." "Yes, they're beginning to rationalize." "I think we need to unbalance things again." A wild card? Quite so. I know the very person. Cranley sat prone, eyes closed, legs crossed, the tetrahedron a glowing shape before him. He excluded all else from his consciousness. There was Cranley, and there was the pyramid. He felt that he should be humming something religious. Then the world turned inside out, and he was staring at his mind. I am Justin Cranley, Harry Truman. I am the eye in the pyramid. The universe warped around the inside of his mind. He lay in bed beside Sandra, 2 weeks after they had first met. He was deeply impressed by how young his lover looked. She lay on her side, a cigarette in her mouth, the bedclothes pulled up below her breasts. Cranley fumbled at her crucifix. Apart from this, she was naked. But Cranley found this last decoration clawing for his attention. "Can't you take this off?" he asked. "It's distracting me." "No." Sandra snatched it from his grasp, pressing it to her chest. "My dad likes me to wear it." "Bible basher, eh?" "No." Sandra shifted in bed defensively, pulling the sheets up. "He's a Christian socialist." "Doesn't he know they're both dead?" Cranley quipped. "He's also a quantum physicist, so I assume he's got a fair grasp of how the universe works." "Ah." Cranley leant back, trying to think of something witty. "He was on the Grosvenor Square March, you know, the big one in the 60s. That's how he met my mum." Sandra shrugged, pulling the sheets down again. "He's always going on about bloody Vietnam." "I've slept with the daughter of a religious fundamentalist aging hippie lefty? Shit. Any other skeletons?" The world changed again. The girl was not familiar, not attractive either. She was frumpy in a baggy shirt and jeans, dark-haired and dark-eyed, wavering around Cranley's age. He didn't know her. "Laura?" he asked innocently. No, that was wrong. "I am as dead as she." She edged into the light, and Cranley saw that her eyes were hollow blank sockets. "My name is Nancy." "Oh, hello." Cranley blinked again. "You're my sister?" "As I might have been. Don't worry, you didn't kill me. It was a simple case of negligence. One of millions," Nancy spat. "As it usually is. 3 days, eh? What a long run. One of us had to survive. Don't worry," she added hurriedly. "I'm not real." Cranley nodded sagely. "Oh, piss off," Nancy screamed at him. "You don't know what I'm talking about. You're disgusting, and I hate you, so there." A figure, no more than a shadow, stood behind Nancy. He was tall and gaunt and grey, but Cranley caught a fleeting glimpse of him. "This is really crap for a bearing of your subconscious soul," Nancy decided. "Where are the weird camera angles and shifting psychedelic backdrops? Where is the strange muzak and the bizarre fantasies?" Something changed in Nancy's face. The callous angles in her eyes softened. She held out a hand to her brother, wearing a mask of desperation. "You know more about Gabriel and Tanith than you are aware. Truman was their creation, and he is now lodged in your brain. Listen to me. I am a figment of your imagination. I am not part of what they're up to. There aren't that many potentials in which I survived. I am beyond their reach, thank God. Oh, thank you, God." The figure of his dead sister shriveled up into an embryo. Cranley found himself kissing Laura, still a naive teenager. He gazed on her face, but her features eluded him. She did, he supposed, look something like Bernice Summerfield. "Please don't let me go." Tears ran down his face. "Please don't ever let me go." He pressed his face into hers and let her warm dark hair bury him. "Sorry, Justin," the pure, long-forgotten voice whispered. "Time to die." There was a burst of white pain in his mind and body simultaneously. Some detached part of his consciousness watched, casually noting the wave of pain sweeping away nervous gates, memory traces, synapses, cerebral paths, DNA, and molecular structures, shattering them into incoherence. Cranley clung ferociously to the last fragment of his sanity. His name, his wonderful name. "My name," he told himself again and again, "is Harry Truman." Then that was gone, and he was a shapeless thing without mind or memory. 3 women stood over him, their faces ablaze with terror and concern. The thing recognized none of them, nor did it care. Its world was empty, save for a chorus whose gentle whisper bounced on the inside of its skull. Slowly mastering the functions of his lips, he began to slur the words. "We live, we live, we live." Cranley was raving. Sandra was kneeling beside him in concern. She clasped one of his hands between her own, but he tugged it away from her, drawing it to his chest. He shook and giggled and chanted. "He's having a fit," Ace said, not coldly. "No," Benny said. "We've destroyed his mind." Sandra's face was bland and empty, too numb for hysteria, Benny felt. They'd done something really stupid this time, hadn't they? And which bimbo had got down on her knees and pleaded with Cranley to stick his head in the blender in the first place? Benny bit her lip out of self-disgust. She glared at Ace, tears welling in the corner of her eyes. "We did this," she scowled. "We've blown him away." Ace wasn't looking at her, though. She stared past Cranley, past Sandra, past Benny. There was an abstract quality in her eyes, and, given Cranley's condition, the effect was surreal, and not a little sick. Sandra was rising, edging backwards slowly. Irritated, Benny turned from the man she'd killed, jerking round to stare at the doorway. Not 3 feet from her head was a vicious stump of metal. A thin, hollow tube erupted phallically from its end. A glove-covered finger stroked its trigger. It was a beautiful piece of weaponry, Benny was certain, capable of shattering the human skull like an egg, a fact that robbed it of its beauty. It was aimed reassuringly just above her left ear. The gun was the possession of a singularly familiar woman in a black coat. Jane Page was smiling, her mouth a humorless crescent. "I should warn you that I am capable of killing everyone in this room before you could reach me." Her voice was monotonous, flat with contempt. "Don't worry, we could guess," Benny snapped as she raised her arms. She might have made a joke of it if there hadn't been a gibbering wreck of a man lying at her feet. The world had lost its sense of humour. "Oh yes, you staged a remarkable recovery last time we met," Page sneered. "What happened to the little weirdo?" "He's dead," Benny said, before anyone else got a chance to reply. "Good, good," Page smiled again. This time it was genuine, designed to make Benny feel worse. It worked. "Your name is Jane Page, isn't it? Computer analyst," Benny continued innocently. "Good pay, nice hours." "You found my card," Page continued, blandly and accurately. Something passed across her face, something akin to doubt. She clutched her gun closer to her. "Why didn't you take—" Benny stared blankly. She hadn't found the gun when she'd searched Page. "You wouldn't think you could hide something that bulky from even the briefest body search." She started to back away, but found a hand locked around her ankle. Cranley clutched at her, his other hand flailing wildly, trying to sit up, Benny thought, and forgetting how. "We live!" Cranley howled, as if it was the most important thing in the world. Benny glanced at the pistol and realized that it was. "We live!" "Not for much longer if you don't shut up," Page laughed. Benny managed a weak grin. She stared at a woman who was totally sincere. She meant that as a joke, a sick mind, but not a mad one. There was something deeply rational about Page's behaviour, which set Benny's teeth screaming. "Who exactly," Ace began, a polite sentence spoken pointedly, "are you?" Page freed a hand to scratch behind her ear. "I don't think there'll be much harm in telling you," she announced. "No one's going to believe you, even if I let you live." She was afflicted with an artificial cough, after which she continued. "I work for the Cabinet Office, for a counter-espionage agency which takes orders directly from the Prime Minister. Republican Security Intelligence. Plebs call it DI5. "You're mad," Ace said coldly. It wasn't an opinion. "Not mad, simply a patriot. Britain must be defended from those who seek to despoil it. My colleagues and I provide that defence. You must understand the need for purity, the imperative to keep the island free." Free from what? Benny asked. The living? Those who do not hold to the democratic principles of the Charter, those who despise their country, those who oppose fundamental humanism, disturbed people, who would be considerably helped were they to be terminally re-educated. No, I hate euphemisms. I kill people. I kill the people who deserve it. Like us, Ace again, sailing too close to the wind for Benny's liking. Like Winterdawn. For the most terrible crimes, Page rattled on, relishing the exposition. Sedition, subversion, sabotage, alliteration, a naughty boy. Very naughty. How's that? She grinned expansively at Ace. Her concentration on the most obviously aggressive woman was, Benny realised, a mistake. Page had let her guard waver, and Sandra took the opportunity of the lapse to jump on her. In that second, Winterdawn's daughter lost any semblance of human shape. She was a mass, an aggressive, shapeless thing with a million blurred limbs. Claws tore at Page's face and hair and clothes. She clung to Page's body, burying the assassin under her own flailing mass. There was something sleek and deadly and uniquely violent about Sandra in a fury. She was working off her anger in a world that was doing its best to spite her. It had to be that, Benny reflected, tentatively slipping forwards to help. You wouldn't get me leaping on a trained killer unless I was really pissed off. Sandra was screaming. The only word Benny caught was father. The rest seemed to be nothing more than a long, slurred mix of swearing and abuse. The scream found an accompaniment, a chorus with one harsh note. It cracked suddenly against the far wall. Further disharmonious bursts smashed into the ceiling. Ace had already hurled herself onto the floor, and Benny followed. The chorus burst into full song, a dull rattle of gunfire, drowning Sandra's solo, driving metal across the room and into the fixtures. Gunfire exploded randomly across the room. The floorboards a foot from Benny's face cracked and splintered as a number of bullets panned across them. Benny looked up wildly and saw Page trying to twist the pistol round to aim at Sandra, without much success. Sandra had a firm grip on the assassin's wrist and was shaking it wildly. Page emitted an effort-filled howl, and Sandra was no longer writhing on her back. She had been sent flying, hitting the ground with a dull thump. She sprawled on the floor, moaning in hysteria and pain. The gunfire stopped. Page, less the cool and emotionless killer, more dishevelled and primally violent, sprang forward. She planted her boots onto Sandra's face and chest and between her legs. Despite the crude, brute violence, there wasn't much real power there. She wasn't trying to break anything. She was just trying to cause pain. Judging from Sandra's shrieks, she was succeeding. Benny forced herself to her feet, aware that her pain was dull and flat from hitting the floor too fast, not the sharp pain of a bullet. Ace was already up and springing at Page. Instantly, she found the muzzle of Page's gun before her, a dark, hollow eye staring like death into her own. She stopped and backed away, hands raised pointedly. Benny shared the gesture. This must be Winterdawn's daughter. Page retained her calm. There was blood on her face, and she kept as cool as ever. The kicking must have sated her bloodlust. Her coat was stained with blood, making it seem blacker than ever. It was like a funeral shroud, the robes of a dark angel. The angel of death leant down and tore open Sandra's shirt. She clutched downwards and wrenched. Sandra shrieked again. Page held up Sandra's crucifix like a trophy. Blood seeped down her arm, smothering the icon. This, Page continued, is exactly what I'm talking about. In order for individual freedom to flourish, we must unchain the human mind from the dogma of the group. The individual urge of the strong society is secular in character. She flung the crucifix away. She's quoting, Benny thought. That's far too meaningful to be original. Don't you believe in anything, Page? I believe in the greatest good for the greatest number. Bentham said that, and he was right. I believe that the strong should be allowed to get on with it, and if anyone can't stand up to that, then tough. Society benefits. That's fine. I enjoy discussing the nature of freedom with gun-toting psychos. If you're going to kill us, do it now and be done with it. Better still, give us a 3-year start. Paige smiled. It was not unwholesome. Why should I kill you? There was something delightful and innocent about that voice. You 3 are exactly what I've been looking for. I can use human resources. Hostages. No, Ace said, her mouth an aggressive O shape, teeth bared and clenched. You forget. I have the superior means of coercion. She tapped the side of the gun meaningfully. The silence that followed was tense and menacing, and thankfully short. It ended with a slow murmur of pain. Cranley was still on the floor, howling plaintively. His left thigh was a mess of congealed blood and muscle, his face flexed with pain, but his screams were half-hearted, as if he was losing control of his vocal cords. Benny moved towards him, but a sharp rattling from Paige's gun had her drawing up short, slipping into motionlessness like a party game. Some party. I'm going to help him, she protested. Why bother? Paige asked casually and sincerely. You've crippled him, Benny squawked her outrage. It wouldn't do much good. Paige's mentality was sealed firmly against the calls of compassion. Paige adopted a strange half-smile, half-sneer. As above, so below. Benny stared. There was nothing she could say. If you're so concerned, one of you can stay behind and clear up. She prodded her boot into Sandra's stomach. Since you're lying about it anyway, it might as well be you. Good luck with him. She turned back to the others. A triumphant, expectant smile twitched like a dying thing on her lips. Let's go, shall we? Benny's feet moved like lead. There was a dogged reluctance to her movements. Ace remained stiff and stationary. Her face was curled up into an expression of disgust. Fingers stabbed viciously in Paige's direction, and for a moment Benny was afraid that Paige might take a shot at her. Her terrible fear of death, submerged by Paige's appearance, suddenly resurfaced at the back of her mind. She shuddered expectantly. Paige didn't shoot. Ace spoke. You listen to me, bitch, she said, cold and self-assured. You've got that gun now. But you drop your guard for a second while I'm around, then I'll kill you. Understand? Perfectly, Paige replied, her tones and smiles sweet. I won't drop my guard. Shall we go? Time travel, eh? Winterdawn sounded cheery. Winterdawn sounded weak, a weak man trying to sound cheery. The doctor had his eyes tight closed. The darkness inside his eyes seemed warm and reassuring, a cosy, stifling sensation that reminded him of childhood when he was smothered by the lethargy of Gallifrey. With his eyes closed, he had his illusions. He couldn't see the corruption, the cynicism, the heartlessness of the adult world. Why should he have to open his eyes? Why couldn't he stay here like this forever? He was scared to open his eyes. After the glass storm, he was afraid there might be little of them left. Bloody bundles and severed optic nerves. He shivered at the thought. He couldn't live without his eyes. He let his lids slide open. There was no pain. There was nothing wrong with his eyes. The intersticks flicked around him, meaningless patterns dancing on an infinitely distant, infinitely large cyclorama. He could see it perfectly. Something like a sigh passed his lips. He looked at his hands, his clothes, his legs. They were undamaged. It's an illusion, Winterdawn's voice cut through the stillness. He was lying on his back on the invisible floor of the gap. Beyond him lay his chair, tipped on its side. One of its wheels spun slowly under its own power. The other lay on the pseudo-ground several meters distant. It looked real from here, the doctor called. Our minds made it real, Winterdawn replied thoughtfully. It was purely a mental attack. No wonder Justin went mad. The doctor knelt by Winterdawn and spoke softly. There is another possibility. Yes? The attack was physical. We suffered terrible injuries, but we don't realize it because this place is fooling with our perception. This is the mental attack. Can you move? For a scientist, you ask some incredibly stupid questions, Winterdawn snapped. The discomfort of his position etched onto his face. The doctor nodded grimly and lifted Winterdawn into a sitting position. Better? Thank you, Winterdawn smiled weakly. I wanted to talk to you about time travel. Is it possible then? Really real? Really real, the doctor smiled. I knew it, Winterdawn announced, glee and triumph shining in his eyes. I knew it. I wish I could have proved it. So Einstein was wrong. No, the doctor shook his head. Einstein was right. His assumptions were wrong. I tried to put him right, but he wouldn't listen. Winterdawn's thin lips bristled into a smile. Do you travel all the time? You're not tied to any time or place? The doctor nodded. I rarely settle. Perhaps I should. I did once, but I was a different person then. It's always been just me, my TARDIS, my companions. He trailed off slowly on a wistful note. Winterdawn's face was curious and cautious, anxious to inquire further, uncertain of whether he was trespassing on private ground, breaking personal taboos. I'm sorry, he was saying slowly. I didn't mean to... The doctor tried to raise a hand to shield his face and his feelings, but he thought better of it. I'll tell you, he said firmly. It doesn't matter now. My family is gone, long gone. My friends, I have my companions. I've had many fellow travellers in a long life. I'm much older than you can imagine. I've had so many friends, but they all go in the end. It's so easy to let them go, so difficult to find them again. Sometimes, you see, I miss the old stability, the warmth of belonging to a single place. But I think I'd be just as lonely there. Winterdawn nodded and looked away. The doctor raised a hand to his forehead, a shadow blocking out his eyes. Silence ruled for a long instant. I wish I'd said goodbye properly, the doctor said softly. I don't like this. I can think of better places to die. His head swung upwards, new vigour burning in his eyes and his soul. His hands clapped together, releasing a sound like a roll of thunder. Let's see if we can get this chair of yours fixed.